Welcome back to a continuation of what we started in a previous broadcast. In this section, we're going to go a little bit deeper. The last time we discussed so many reasons why the oil palm crop is to be chosen as the best crop to integrate with the real estate. For this section, we're going to be going into some key things we need to know further about the oil palm crop. The oil palm belongs to a family of crop that is referred to as the palmier, or simply they can just call it the palm. The oil palm is not the only crop in the palm family. There are other crops like the royal palm, some of these ornamental palms, which belongs to the palm family. But the oil palm is very quick to note that belongs to the palmier family. Another thing is that the fruit of the oil palm is referred to as drupe. There are other types of fruit. We have the berry. And one of the difference between the berry and the drupe is the fact that the berries are fruit with multiple seeds inside of them. But if you look at the oil palm fruit, it's called a drupe because there's only a single seed in it. And the reason why it is popularly referred to as drupe. Then another thing that should be noted about the oil palm is the fact that there are different varieties. In previous broadcasts, I shared some of my personal experience on why some persons feel that the oil palm does not produce maximally or has a long latent period. And I said it's something that there are different varieties, and there are basically three varieties, or what we call cultivars of the oil palm. First, we have the Dura. The Dura is the variety that, if you look at the fruit, basically you have the fleshy portion of the fruits, and then you have the kernel, the seed inside. If you talk about the Dura variety, is the variety that has a bigger kernel with a thin or smaller fleshy, or what we call the mesocarp. And because of this, the Dura variety have the capacity to produce little oil, while it has capacity to produce more of the kernel. And then you have the second variety, which is referred to as the Piscifera. The Piscifera variety is almost like opposite of the Dura. In this case, you have little or no kernel with a bigger mesocarp, or the fleshy portion. And one thing about the oil palm, like I said in my previous broadcast, is that everything about the oil palm is economic and very important, including the kernel, which produces the PKO, the palm kernel oil. Having both products is not a bad idea. So that led to what we call in science as crop breeding, kind of breeding, to get the third variety of the oil palm, which is referred to as the Tenera. So the Tenera is a third breed, and we call it the hybrid variety. The Tenera is actually a cross. There's a scientific method for doing that. Cross-pollination between the Piscifera and the Dura that give rise to the Tenera. So the Tenera has moderate kernel, it has moderate mesocarp. And so the Tenera can give you moderate oil, can also give you the PKO, and then you have 50-50 from both ends. And then it is usually recommended that if you are going into the oil palm cultivation, the Tenera is preferable. The Tenera is highly recommended. If you are talking about yield, if you are talking about productivity, if you are talking about maximum return on investment, then the Tenera is to be considered. Another thing I want you to also note about the oil palm is the climatic requirement. There are two basic climatic requirements for the oil palm, and that is the temperature and rainfall. That will also make me again to mention the Silverwell company on the choice of their location. The Silverwell, the agro company, is located in a geographical area where this climatic requirement that I'm about to talk about is highly favorable for the cultivation of this crop. Now, I said the two basic climatic requirements is temperature and rainfall. The oil palm requires a temperature of an average of 27 degrees Celsius, but it can range from 27 degrees Celsius to about 32 degrees Celsius. And then this again is obtainable in the tropical rainforest where we are, where Edo State is located, and where the Silverwell Agro Real Estate Company is also located. Talking about rainfall, an average rainfall of about 150 cm to 200 cm per annum is required for the successful growing of the oil palm. Again, this is obtainable in this zone where we have the Silver Well Company located in. So those are the basic climatic requirements: temperature and rainfall for the cultivation of oil palm. Another requirement is soil requirement. For the cultivation of oil palm is the loamy soil. The loamy soil rich in organic matter. Let me also mention here that the Silver Well Agro Estate Company is also located in an environment where, because of the prevalence of vegetations, which of course add manure and organic matter to the soil, you have the soils in this region largely rich, largely organic, and largely loamy and healthy and suitable for the cultivation of the oil crop. Another thing to note is that the oil palm is propagated by seed, and planting date for the oil palm can range from August to May in this part of the world, part of the country. This time frame involves both the pre-nursery, nursery, and transplanting to feed period, which we are going to take time to properly dwell on, if not in this episode, maybe the next. So these are few things that is worth noting about the oil palm. So let's move now to looking at the cultivation of the oil palm crop. The cultivation of this crop can be basically looked at under 5 stages when it comes to the cultivation of the oil palm. You have the land preparation stage, you have the germination stage, you have the pre-nursery stage, and then you have the transplanting stage. All right, talking about the land preparation. In land preparation, we are looking at first the clearing of the vegetation, and this could be done manually by getting few laborers, or it can be done mechanically by using machines, or it can be done chemically by the use of chemicals. It all depends on the largeness or the scale of production that we are talking about. And it's also quite nothing that in land preparation for the oil palm, unlike the other arable crops or annual crops, there is really no need for making of ridges or harrowing or making of heaps. These things are actually optional, if not nearly unnecessary. So we have just the basic land clearing, which could be done manually, chemically, or mechanically. So that's the first stage, land preparation. Then the second stage is the germination stage. Now, the germination stage for oil palm cultivation is a stage that I see to be optional for farmers who may want to go into the production of oil palm. The reason for this is that we have some organizations or some farms that are purely into those processes of bringing about germination of the seeds and then nurtured through the pre-nursery and nursery. So the farmer can easily get the seedlings which has already been raised, and then they can plant directly to the feed. But for a case where the farmer may also want to grow their seedlings from the seed themselves, then they have to subject the seeds of the oil palm to some basic treatments. The reason for this is not because the seeds cannot germinate naturally on their own, but it takes a longer period. It could, if you want to leave the seed to germinate on their own, it could take up to a year or thereabout for you to record germination. But you can put in place the conditions necessary for germination. You can regulate the environment to enhancing and speeding up the time it will take for your seeds to germinate. So if the farmer wants to do this himself by growing his seedlings from the seed, then he have to subject the seeds to some germination treatment. And this treatment will take about 109 days. That's roughly about 4 months. Now, let me run through this step in the germination stage. The first is to get viable seed. Of course, when we mean viable seed, we are talking about seeds that have the tendency to germinate, that have not stayed for too long, and that has not been damaged. Their cotyledons and everything necessary for it to germinate are still intact. So when you get a viable seed, the first step is to soak the seed for about 7 days. So you have your viable seed soaked in water for about 7 days. Now, all through these 7 days, you have the water constantly be changed. So on daily basis, the water is being changed for these 7 days. The step 2, after 7 days, seeds are placed in a shade. You take the seed from the soaked water after 7 days, puts it in a shade, open to aeration, and then for the purpose of drying for just 24 hours. And then after that, the third stage is bagging of the seed. So sometimes when you go to some companies, you can get the seed at this stage. Normally, it is actually 500. Sometimes they bag them 500 seeds per the polythene bag. So after the second stage of drying the seeds that have been soaked for 7 days, you have them bagged in polythene bags. And then the next stage is step 4, is that the seeds are then taken or sent to the germinator with a temperature of 39 degrees Celsius or 40 degrees Celsius for a minimum of about 80 days. Now, the germinator is just an environment that has been conditioned to have that temperature requirement of 39 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius. So after that stage, you have step 5, where those seeds are thereafter soaked again for 7 days. So after keeping the seed in the germinator for about 80 days, you bring out the seeds and then re-soaked for another 7 days. And all of these days, the water is constantly being changed. And then after this stage, again, the seeds are taken out to aerated environment and kept for like 2 hours to dry. And then once this treatment has been done on the seed, then the seeds can be planted. So the germination stage has to run through this treatment I just outlined, that you carry that on the seed. And I have said that the essence of this treatment is, number 1, to hasten germination, and then to get efficient germination. Because once a seed is subjected to these stages of treatment, there is about 85 to 90% germination. This you can't get when you want to rely on natural factor to bring about the germination. That leads us to the pre-nursery stage. So once that treatment has been done, then the seeds are now taken to the pre-nursery section. The pre-nursery section, you can use wooden boxes, or again polythene could be used, or the bare ground that has been plowed can be used. So the seeds are sold on these boxes that obviously have been filled with topsoil, loamy soil rich in organic matter. You must have filled the boxes with this soil, and then you have the treated seed planted in this soil at a spacing of 7 centimeter by 7 centimeter. That is the spacing for the pre-nursery. And so once it's planted, it's expected that after about 2 weeks, the seeds will start germinating. So once the seed germinates, you need to provide some certain things at that pre-nursery stage. Number 1, shade. There's need for shade to be provided, and then there's also need for constant watering. And then another thing, you have to carry out mulching. Mulching is getting some organic material, could be dead remain of plants, and then to cover the surface of the soil. We'll talk about all of this in subsequent episode. And then also, once this is put in place, it's expected that after about some period of time, germinated seeds are transferred from the pre-nursery to the nursery operation. The nursery operation can also be done with the polythene bags, or it could also be done on beds, plowed soil that have been made in form of beds. Then the germinated seeds are transferred from the pre-nursery, where there is intensive care, to the nursery. The nursery is expected to last beginning from early April. It's preferable for transferring your seedlings from the pre-nursery to the nursery. So at this point, you have to also carry out some practices. Basically, like I said, in the pre-nursery, you have a spacing of 7 cm by 7 cm. But when you bring it to the nursery, you are talking about a spacing of 60 cm by 60 cm. Yes, the spacing is increasing because obviously the seedling is growing much bigger. So a spacing of 60 cm by 60 cm is required in the nursery. And then also there have to be constant watering. Then weeding and mulching also have to be done. Once this has been properly done for a period of time in the nursery, then it can be transplanted from the nursery to the field, and that is what we call the transplanting stage. So transplanting is normally done after 1 year of seedlings being raised or nurtured in the nursery. And there are other factors that have to be considered before you can say, okay, this seedling is ready to be transplanted to the field. So basic factors here is the number of leaves that have been developed. Any seedling that have been able to develop up to 12 to 15 leaves and have grown to a height of 1 meter is fit enough to be transplanted to the field. Now, when you are transplanted to the field, the spacing will also have to change. So the spacing in the field for oil palm is usually 9 by 9 by 9 meters in a triangular form. So that is the spacing. And it should also be noted that when you are transferring your seedling from the nursery to the field, it have to be done with a ball of soil taken along with the seedling. So it's not a situation of just uprooting your seedlings and shaking up the soils and taking to the field. It may affect the picking up of the seedling on the field. So there's a system that ensures that once you are moving the seedling, you are moving it with a ball of soil. And also the roots of the seedling should also be trimmed. So the roots are trimmed, and the purpose of this trimming is to hasten up the development of new roots from the seedling so that they can easily adapt to where you are transplanting them on. So on the average, a density of 145 oil palm plant is required for 1 hectare of land at a spacing of 9 meter by 9 meter by 9 meter in a triangular pattern. Let me quickly lastly dwell on some cultural practices in this cultivation process, beginning from the germination stage to the pre-nursery stage to the nursery stage and then to the transplanting. Even in the field, there are cultural practices that have to be carried out. Cultural practices are just routine, normal activities, practices that are carried out on the farm in a bit to maintain the crop that have been sown and to ensure that there is a 100% establishment of the crop. So what are some of these cultural practices? One in the list is weeding. Weeding is a cultural practice. Although in my first broadcast I said that the oil palm is highly resistant to weed and to pests. Yes, that is true. Again, I'm going to bring to your knowledge when we come to the area of dwelling on some of these pests, how weed can be a breeding ground for some of these pests. So it is advisable that weeding is constantly done. This can be done manually, can be done mechanically because of the spacing. The spacing helps for mechanical operation on the oil palm plantations. It can also be done chemically with the use of herbicides and the control. And then another cultural practice is fertilizer application. Again, there's a section where we devote to knowing the type of fertilizer that should be applied to the oil palm. Another cultural practice is the cover cropping or intercropping. This is going to form another discussion where we'll take enough time to dwell on the science of intercropping. And then we also have pruning and then irrigation, which is artificial supply of water where necessary. These are some of the cultural practices that is necessary in the cultivation of oil palm. So far in this section, we've seen some key things about the oil palm, and then we have extensively dealt with the cultivation of the oil palm and its different stages in the cultivation, beginning from land preparation to germination of seed, which is actually optional. If you're a farmer that wish not to bother yourself about the several treatments you have to go through, you can simply get your seedlings from reputable farms where they've carried out those germination process already, and then you get them which has already been taken through the pre-nursery and the nursery stage, and the only thing is just to transfer to the field and do every other necessary cultural practice that need to be put in place for the establishment of the crop. So I trust that you've learned a lot and you've received enough information as regards the cultivation of the oil palm. Stay tuned, join us in our next section where we'll be discussing some other important things you need to know about the oil palm. Thank you. Bye for now.